Ms. Boyd, there's the nub of it, isn't it? That by criminalizing it, what you do is you push it underground. You turn it over, as it were, into the hands of criminals, into the hands of those that are not well-wishers of society, are interested simply in turning a buck. Now, if you have what Mr. Borden is suggesting, at least it can be regulated. What's your view?
Well, first of all, if Mr. Borden would like to update himself on the facts, he can go to www.addictiontoday.org and get the research references for the various American states and the schools that I mentioned. And some of that information is from the UN itself, some is from SAMHSA. He does need to, if he's going to make decisions, he does need to have the correct research. The second point
I would like
you made...
to interject here.
Ms. Boyd, just bear with me.
I edit a widely read drug policy newsletter. We follow the research, and we do have the correct facts. Use has not risen in states with more lenient policies versus states that have not. Generally, the national trends are similar from state to state here. And in some of the medical marijuana states, again, not an identical issue, use has actually declined. And again, in the Netherlands, where you can buy marijuana by walking into a coffee shop that everyone knows where they are, the use rate is roughly half of what it is in some neighboring countries, such as France.
So, Mr. Borden, how would you respond to a total legalization, not decriminalization, totally legalizing all drugs? How would you respond to that?
We are in favor of legalization, and we believe there would be regulations, controls within that. Our guidepost is that adults who are determined to use these drugs will have some legal means of accessing them. And we would also anticipate there being more control, more careful, more scrutiny of a heroin providing system than of a cannabis or even an alcohol providing system. But we believe in having some form of legalization. And we believe that will make the situation safer, especially for the users. It will solve security, help to solve security problems. Like in Afghanistan, it will stop crime, just as we saw following the repeal of alcohol prohibition in the early 1930s here in the United States.
And you, Ms. Boyd, think that that would be catastrophic, don't you?
I do. Well, we're using the same argument. You could say, well, why don't we legalize robbery, mugging, murder? And then all the rates of crime will go down. It's the same concept.
Ms. Boyd,
but why are we talking about criminalization? We should be talking about the health aspects, about recovery, about getting people to recover. And this is disproportionate amount on supply reduction. And I think that's what the major problem is. This program reflects a lot of the disproportionate emphasis on supply reduction rather than demand reduction.
Ms. Boyd, with respect, it's a tenuous argument you're making. As I said earlier on, there's less than 5% of the people across the planet who are using these drugs. Now, you use the word disproportionate. They tend to get disproportionate amounts of coverage. They get disproportionate amounts of public funding for them to recover. But you see, as I said, the British government...
No, not for them to recover. Disproportionate in that it gets too little funding for them to recover, yes.
Well, you say so, but how much public health money across the world is dedicated to river blindness? How much to HIV/AIDS in Africa? See, these are problems that people who are blameless often wind up with. But you know, as Mr. Borden was perhaps saying there, this is a conscious choice that many of these people take and make when they get into drugs and drug usage. Surely if the parameters, the infrastructure was already there to support them once they started using drugs, rather than the stigma, the social stigma that maybe you yourself attach to it, maybe the problem wouldn't be quite so difficult to address.
I don't attach a social stigma, and people might make a conscious choice to pick up a drink or a drug the first time, but if they have the brain chemistry, the neurochemistry, to become dependent, it is not their choice after that.
All right. Mr. Borden, in the world, we have a massive problem when it comes to legal drugs, illicit drugs, like alcohol and tobacco. These are drugs that are causing social ructions. Now, we've got problems with those two. Why is it that you're so desperate to add another raft of other drugs that could present equally large problems, if not larger problems? As Ms. Boyd says, why are you so keen to experiment with people's lives?
Well, I see prohibition as the experiment that wasn't ended as after it was clear that it wasn't working. But on the subject of substance abuse, we see it as one problem, or rather as a set of interrelated problems. And so, as we touched on earlier, there's research showing a substitution effect between cannabis use and alcohol use. So I believe there would be more experimentation, more casual use, perhaps more addiction. That's less clear, but perhaps more addiction to some of the drugs that are illegal now. But you can't physically use, generally speaking, you can't physically use one drug and another or 5 other drugs at exactly the same moments of time. People are making choices what they use. Those choices are affected to the law by some degree. People like me who've never tried these drugs, I think we're the ones who are being dissuaded from trying them now. People who would not get addicted, would not behave irresponsibly. I think the people who the people who are using drugs now are risk takers, and it's not clear how many more risk takers there are who aren't already taking risks. So drug use patterns are interrelated, so I don't see it as a new problem. I see it as changing the precise map of the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.